In a previous video about why the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds don't fly 5th-gen fighters, I said this about the F-22. It was designed at the end of the Cold War to fight the Soviet Union, and some of you were not having it. So let me say it again, louder this time for those in the back. The F-22 Raptor is a Cold War fighter jet, and I'm gonna prove it. Now look, I get it. You see the Raptor at an air show and the maneuvers it does are just insane. It looks like it's made by aliens. How could it possibly be from a war that ended over 3 decades ago? Beyond that, a simple Google search will tell you that it didn't enter service officially until 2005, and that's probably where most of the skepticism is coming from. But you have to keep in mind that with big military aerospace projects like the F-22, the timelines are almost always longer than you think. And the design work that defines its mission, that happens at the very beginning of the project. The question isn't about when it entered service, it's about when someone decided that it needed to exist. So, when did the United States first decide it needed the airplane that would become the F-22? The answer, unbelievably, is 1981. Which, was during the Cold War. In May of 1981, the Air Force published a request for information to the American aerospace industry for proposals on what they called the Advanced Tactical Fighter, or ATF. The reason? Between 1977 and 1979, American satellites photographed 2 prototype Soviet aircraft, later identified as the Su-27 Flanker and the MiG-29 Fulcrum. When the US Air Force saw those images, they were concerned that these jets were going to be as good as the F-15 and F-16. Maybe better. The Soviet Union was building a generation of fighters that could go toe-to-toe with the best fighters the US had to offer. The ATF existed to build an air superiority fighter that would be so far ahead of anything else flying that it wouldn't matter what the Soviets built. For the entire 1980s, the Reagan defense buildup, the Able Archer exercises, the whole hair-trigger stretch of the Cold War, the Air Force was locking down requirements for this airplane. By 1984, they were official. Stealth. Heavy emphasis on maneuverability, and supercruise, or sustaining supersonic flight without afterburner. Basically, the idea was to entirely replace the capabilities and combat role of the F-15 Eagle with a faster, stealthier, and more lethal next-generation fighter. In so doing, the US would maintain its air superiority lead over the Soviet Union indefinitely. In 1986, they narrowed to 2 competing prototype teams, Lockheed with Boeing and General Dynamics building the YF-22, and Northrop with McDonnell Douglas building the YF-23. 4 years of design and construction, with the Soviet threat looming throughout. On September 29, 1990, Lockheed Chief Test Pilot Dave Ferguson lifted the YF-22 off the runway at Palmdale and flew at 18 minutes to Edwards Air Force Base. It was a conservative first flight, max speed 250 knots, 12,500 feet, just a basic airworthiness check. But it took 9 years to get there. 9 years since the ATF request for information was issued in 1981. Keep in mind, in September of 1990, the Soviet Union would exist for more than a year. I could probably rest my case here, but we're having fun. Let's keep going. December 25th, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev resigns. The next day, the Supreme Soviet votes itself and the USSR out of existence. 8 months before that, in April of 1991, the US Air Force had already picked the YF-22 as the winner of the ATF contest. Full-scale development was approved. They were building this extraordinary, expensive, complicated airplane designed specifically to outfly Soviet fighters in a world in which the Soviet Union no longer existed. But as they say, in for a penny, in for a pound. It was still going to get built. The only question left was how many. The original plan back in the 80s was 750 aircraft, basically a 1-to-1 replacement for every F-15 in the fleet. With the Soviet Union gone, the cuts started almost immediately. By 1997, down to 339. By 2003, 277. In 2004, the Pentagon pivoted hard to a post-9/11 landscape focused on Iraq, Afghanistan, and counterinsurgency. Donald Rumsfeld's DoD cut the order to 183. And in 2009, Defense Secretary Robert Gates ended the program at 187 aircraft, saying the F-22 lacked relevance in asymmetric post-Cold War conflicts. I'm going to let that quote sit for just a minute because it basically proves my whole point. The logic was that the fight was against terrorists. Terrorist organizations don't have air forces. Why keep building the most advanced air superiority fighter ever made? And so, the last F-22 rolled off the line in 2011. The plan for 750 ATF jets ended at just 187. Now, I know what some of you are already typing in the comments. We're building tons of F-35s. Higher numbers are better anyway, right? No. No, they're not. The F-35 was designed to replace a range of aircraft across multiple services. The F-16, the AV-8B Harrier, the F-A-18. The whole point was versatility, strike capability, sensor fusion, stealth, linking multiple aircraft into a shared battlefield picture. It does all of that very well. And it's a jack of all trades, but kind of a master of none. Dedicated air superiority was never the mission. The Raptor was built for one thing: be the most lethal jet in the sky. Everything about it serves that outcome. The supercruise, the thrust vectoring, the stealth optimized specifically for air-to-air. The F-35 is exceptional at its job. Its job just isn't the F-22's job. The Air Force, of course, still has F-15s and F-16s that can fight air-to-air, and they do it well, but they're 4th-gen platforms. Against an adversary with 5th-gen fighters, that's a problem. Enter China. The J-20 is their 5th-generation stealth fighter, and they have been building them at a rapid pace. As of early 2026, estimates put the fleet above 300, with roughly 100 to 120 aircraft rolling out of the factory per year. Conservative estimates put 800 to 1,000 J-20s in the hands of the Chinese military by 2030. The US only ever made 187 F-22s, and while there is no official count from the Air Force of how many are combat ready in 2026, estimates peg it at closer to 150 once you account for accidents, an aging maintenance operation, and allocating some as dedicated training aircraft. All that said, the F-22 is probably still the better airplane, at least on paper. Researchers at China's Northwestern Polytechnical University ran a simulation in 2024 and found a single J-20 had less than a 10% chance of beating an F-22 one-on-one. But keep in mind, China could potentially have 10 times as many J-20s as the US has F-22s in the next few years, with an active production line to make more. And there will never be a new F-22 made. More on that in a bit. Additionally, the same simulation found the J-20 won 95% of the time when paired with wingman drones. So it's not just a numbers problem. The nature of these engagements is changing, and the F-22 was designed for an era of aerial combat that may already be evolving past it. Russia has a 5th-generation fighter too, the Su-57. It's constrained right now, sanctions, the ongoing war in Ukraine, a small fleet, but it exists, it's flying, and it's getting upgraded. While Russia isn't the peer threat it was during the Cold War, their relationship with the US is also not what anyone would call stable right now. And then there's Iran. As of this recording, the US is engaged in active military operations against Iran. Their Air Force was never a 5th-generation threat. In fact, they were still flying the long-ago retired F-14 until they were potentially all destroyed earlier this year. Pour one out for their venerable Tomcat. The point is, though, the US isn't just in conflict with terrorists anymore. Their adversaries have air forces. In 2009, America's assumption was that peer threats were a thing of the past. They weren't. The next obvious question to ask would be, can the US just build more F-22s? At the request of Congress, the Air Force actually commissioned a full study on this in 2017. The short answer is no. The tooling was retained, but never meant to sit in storage for more than 3 years. Suppliers moved on, and most importantly, workers with specialized knowledge were no longer available. The estimated cost to restart the line and procure around 194 additional aircraft was roughly $50 billion. Even if it could be restarted, the avionics are 1990s vintage. Any restart would require a redesign anyway to make it compatible with modern warfighting systems. At that point, you're basically building a whole new airplane. So why not just build a new airplane? Enter the F-47, Boeing's design, selected as the winner of the Next Generation Air Dominance program in March of 2025. It's the Raptor's intended successor, and it won't be operational until the mid-2030s at the earliest. See, this is just how military aviation works. Requirements get written for threats that won't be fully realized for a generation. The aircraft that eventually rolls off the line was shaped by a world that may look nothing like the one it flies into. The F-22 was designed in the 1980s to fight a Soviet Air Force that dissolved before the plane entered service. The RFI was written in 1981. Initial operational capacity came in December of 2005. If you're doing the math at home, that's 24 years. Basically a quarter of a century. The F-47 was selected in 2025. Even if this program moves faster, and let's face it, they never do, the gap between now and meaningful operational numbers is a decade, maybe 2, maybe more. The people who will fly the F-47 in squadron service could be in grade school right now. Kindergarten. I mean, they might not even be born yet. The air superiority gap is real, and it's widening. All right, let's land this thing, shall we? Is the F-22 a Cold War fighter? Well, the ATF was started in 1981 specifically to fight the Soviet Union. The prototype flew while the USSR still existed, and it was deprioritized because the Cold War ended, and the mission it was built for seemed to go away. Now, ironically, the threat environment in 2026 looks more like 1981 than anyone expected when the US called it at 187 jets and closed the line. Yeah, I'm thinking it's a Cold War fighter. If you want to keep the conversation going, go ahead and like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment down below. This video quite literally only exists because of YouTube comments like the one I hope you're about to type. Thank you so much for participating in this project with me. I know it's been a little while, and thanks for bearing with me. I'll see you on the next one.